Like, are we expecting any other commissioners?
Maybe. Just one. We'll get started.
You don't need to respond. You want to take a- Was guardian angel here on earth.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I think it's now time to call this work session to order. Today is December 13, 2023. It's a work session on AR 2023-423, a resolution of the Anchorage Municipal Assembly updating and amending the Election Observers Handbook and associated forms. We'll go ahead and do introductions. Mr. Cross.
Kevin Cross, present.
Scott Myers.
Anna Brawley.
Meg Zalatel.
Christopher Constant, and on the phone we have Mr. Salt. Are you there? Maybe not. We'll see if he comes back in.
Yeah, I'm here. So I tried to come up with you.
Great, thanks. You have Mr. Salt. And also we have invited the Elections Commission members to participate in this work session. We have Mr. Lehman. Welcome. So our microphones work when you have the green button on, and you try your best not to leave the green button on just in case I cause you to mutter something under your breath you don't mean for the public to hear, because that sometimes happens. And so the purpose of the meeting again is to go through the revisions to the manual this year and to have a discussion about why they are where they are. The predicate of this whole conversation is that annually the municipality, the assembly updates both Title 28 and the Elections Observer Manual. When we get into the manual, you'll see there's all of the years it's been amended since this one was developed. 2017, 2019, 2021, 2022, and now 2023. So it's a common occurrence. And many of the changes that are involved to the manual this year, the more substantial ones, kind of reflect a conversation that we've been having relating to the certification of the election last year. And there was a lot of attention that was paid to the certification of the election last year because of some issues relating to complaints and renewed complaints. And I want to start by saying, having monitored that whole process, the process did in fact work as it was intended. The commission conducted themselves fully in line with the code, fully in line with the manual, and the outcome was good. But there were some moments of concern relating to the steps leading up to the certification process that the assembly has. And so that's kind of the predicate, just to say that the Elections Commission last year did everything just right, and it should be lauded in its work. And then this year we propose a series of changes. So the workflow today will be Mr. Hurt will walk us through kind of line by line the changes, and then we'll come back for discussion afterwards of specific items. So I'm going to now hand the floor over to Mr. Hurt.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members. Through the chair, I'm just going to take a minute to orient you to the proposed AR 2023-423. Obviously, page 1 is the AR itself. Exhibit A, starting on page 2, is the red line version of the Observer's Handbook. I assume everybody's familiar with Microsoft Word. It essentially has the tracked changes, allowing us to highlight what is actually changed or proposed change within the Election Observer's Handbook. And then Exhibit B, which is starting on page 46 of 96, is the clean version, essentially what the Observer's Handbook will look like if all the proposed changes are adopted and essentially accepted in Microsoft Word. So to walk you through the red line version, I think it'll be easiest to highlight the changes there. On page 7 of 96 is the first change, which is essentially a correction of the spelling of principal and minor typos. A lot of the changes in here are going to be minor changes to form as to substance. The next page, page 8.
Okay, hold on.
Yes.
I'm hearing we might have some issues related to the phone line.
Yep.
Do you see a number of people in the queue?
No, I see.
Just
I see the 2 people.
so what phone number are we in? Sorry, everybody. Can you give me the phone number that we're supposed to have? It's like 72 something, 727,
Got it saved.
727 1290 maybe?
273-5190.
I have it all wrong. 2735190. And then the code is what?
786815 pound.
Oh, this is a different number than we normally have.
Uh-huh.
So,
This is what I usually call it.
yeah, normally it's, oh no, that's not the one either. There's an,
Okay, well, that was,
hold on.
What's the one on the agenda?
There isn't an agenda.
Because it's a work session. Okay.
Tell everyone to.
Technology.
Yeah, so
7385190.
that's it. But isn't there normally
What
a,
I dialed into for that.
hold on, there's another number. This is a little awkward. 273-5190, 721-227 pound. That's usually the code. So folks are going to be in there,
Okay, what code?
721-227 pound. Let me text Felix and make sure. So he says it's a different code, so 786815 pound.
The participant code in the,
Notice.
right, the meeting, the calendar invite is 7866815. Is that a number you called into?
I'm checking with him right now. So, Mr. Salt, what number did you dial into?
The participant code.
I dialed into the main conference bridge.
And then the code you used?
Let me get there. 721-227.
So this one is set up to 721-227 and you have half a dozen people in.
So Allie and Randy, can you please hang up and dial back into 78? I think.
Randy and Ally, can you dial back in and use a different code? The code would be 786815 pound.
And it's on your calendar invite.
So again,
Okay, will do.
786815 pound. Thank you.
Okay.
And before I hop off, I would just recommend updating the public notice on the website because the standard number is included on the website.
Thank you.
So, hold on. Felix, oh wait. Hold on. He's not on yet. We'll very likely just extend the meeting by 15 minutes for those who can stay.
Please enter your participant or moderator code followed by the pound key.
7, what is it?
786-815.
Please say your name followed by the pound key.
Are you there? Can you hear me, Felix?
Randy's here. Yeah. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, so we're going to start this meeting over.
All right, let's try again.
So thank you, Felix, for texting. I was wondering where everyone was at and why no one was here. I was a little concerned, but the train started 15 minutes ago. So why don't we go ahead and do introductions one more time, Mr. Cross?
Kevin Cross. Scott Myers.
Anna Brawley. Big Zalto.
Christopher Constant, and on the phone, I see we have Mr. Salt,
Here.
Mr. Rivera,
Present.
Ms. Braga, are you there?
Yes.
Are there any other members on the phone?
Mr. Chair, I do believe that there were a couple of election commission members
Right.
on the phone.
First, we'll do members. And so are there any other members on the phone? And I'm not hearing any. So we have in the room with us, Commissioner Lauren Lehman, welcome. And on the phone, who are the commissioners we have?
Lee Treadwell, for as long as I can be on. I'm not sure I can stay for the whole meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Treadwell. Is there another commissioner on the phone?
Lisa Torkelson.
Hi there, Lisa.
Lisa Torkelson.
Hi, thank you very much. Okay, so this is a work session on AR 2023-423. Today is the 13th of December. It is now 1:14 p.m. We started at 1:02 p.m., but we're starting over again. And so I'll be less eloquent in saying that the purpose of this meeting is to run through proposed changes. It's a work session in which we've invited the Elections Commission to participate. And Jessica, would you pull the door closed because of the vacuum? Thank you. I'm going to hand this off now to Mr. Hurt, our legislative counsel, to walk us through line by line the proposed changes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will try to be just as eloquent as before, but I'm also skeptical. All right, good afternoon, members. Before you and posted to the work session page virtually is proposed AR 2023-423. Just to orient you quickly, page 1 is obviously the resolution itself. Starting on page 2 is Exhibit A, the red line version of the Observer's Handbook. And as I stated, this is essentially the Microsoft Word document with tracked changes to enable the reader to easily identify where changes have been made from the previous year. Starting on page 46 of this document, you'll find Exhibit B, the clean version, which is what the Observer Handbook will look like if all the proposed changes are accepted. I will be walking you through Exhibit A because obviously the changes are much easier to identify in that version. Many of these changes are simply either corrections of typos or changes as to form, and then some are substantive. Page 7 is the first change of any note, which is simply correcting principal and correction of a typo to the proper spelling of principal. In that context. On page 8, there are changes made which are intended to clarify how complaints and suggestions are made to the municipal clerk and the expectations of the conduct of election observers, and clarifies who may submit those complaints. Page 11 would be our next change. Again, this is more of a change as to form, simply to clarify that the observer must be present. Page 13 of 96 is the next change. Again, this is intended to clarify the language and simplify it. More of a change to form than as to substance. If we proceed to page 16, this change again is intended to provide more clarity because it reorganizes a lot of the information to put it in chronological order as to how the process for challenge of signature verification should work. It doesn't make any real substantive changes. It just presents it in chronological order to make it more easily understandable to the reader. Page 17, the change here restores the procedure for raising administrative and management concerns to the clerk. On page 18, this change restores the procedures for raising allegations of election official misconduct or allegations of malconduct, I believe is the term used in code. And it restores the process for raising those concerns first to the clerk and then to the assembly through the election contest procedures provided in code. The next change occurs on is also on page 18, which adds a sentence clarifying that pursuant to code, if an election contest is accepted by the assembly can request the election commissions investigate the contest. The next page, page 19, adds security personnel to persons other than election officials, observers allowed to remain in the polling location. The next page, page 20. Let's see, this change removes the word daily and corrects a typo, changing that to than. The removal of the word daily is on the next page, page 21. On page 21 also, there is a change of phrasing from return ballot envelope to ballot return envelope to more accurately reflect the nomenclature used. On page 22, this change removes the provision for military and overseas ballots being received on noon of the day of certification. Page 22 also adds verbiage clarifying that ballots are timely received when deposited in a drop box or voted at a vote center when the voter is in line to do so no later than 8 p.m. that day on election day. Page 24 adds examples of valid corrections that may be made. And this section was added by AO 2022-98 as amended. On page 27, this moves information from page 28, again, to put it in chronological order so that's more logically presented in the Election Observer's Handbook. It also rewords the recount section, clarifies the methods for recount. On page 30, the form is changed to cite directly to the code provisions for unsworn falsification. And this change is also made on page 32, page 34, as well as page 36. Also on page 36, it adds reasons for challenge, which are provided in code. Page 38 again, and on page 39 again, the forms are reworded to directly cite to the code provision for unsworn falsification. Also on page 39, it changes the word suggestion to concerns. These forms on page 40 and 41 are removed entirely, as clearly denoted. And then the last change is on page 44, where the observer agrees to follow the rules that were laid out in the handbook. And that concludes the changes within the red line version, Exhibit A of AR 2023-423.
Thank you, Mr. Hurt. So the assembly process for work sessions is that anyone can get into the queue to ask questions. It's a little trickier for the members who are on the phone who don't have my mobile number to ask to be put in the queue. So that would be Mr. Treadwell and Ms. Torkelson. So I would just ask that you speak up and you'll be recognized for the purpose of putting you into the queue, maybe not for the purpose of speaking immediately at that time. Everyone else in the room can just grab my attention. So the next part of the process is to walk through any questions, comments, and concerns relating to the proposed changes as drafted. So I am ready to steward that conversation.
Mr. Chairman, this is me. Can you put me in the queue?
Yeah, since you're the first one, please take the lead, Mr. Treadwell.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for the assembly looking at this. And, Mr. Chairman, you were at our meeting when, questions came up about the city IT policy and so forth. But having been through 2 of the 3 extensive sessions, with observers since I got on the commission, I just want to make the point that the commission has been a place that kind of air concerns. And I think if you look at the concerns that are aired by most of the observers, it's been a way that we can kind of explain them in the public and so forth. We've made it very clear to observers that, we cannot overturn an election. We can perhaps recommend to the assembly that they delay, that you delay a certification until something, happens and so forth. But it has been a way for the observers to bring forward something that isn't there. And I guess it's on page 18. I'm trying to pull it up on the computer as I'm speaking. But I really think the idea that a complaint comes forward can be aired by the commission that has helped us in the past and make recommendations for improvements to procedures and so forth. So if you don't want the commission involved in complaints, I would say what's the commission for? And, it's something that I think is taken on pretty well. But I'll just leave it at that. That's my basic concern with what's in the revised document.
Thank you. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. I had just really a basic question, and this would be for council or the clerk, maybe both. But can you just remind us what is the definition of an election observer? Like what is that person doing? And is that just a general member of the public, or kind of just to again refresh kind of what their role is and how it's defined?
Sure. So an observer is someone who registers to observe the election process for a candidate. And so a member of the public can come in and watch, yes, but in order to become an observer, there's a process. They have to take a tour, take observer training. They have to sign a confidentiality agreement because they're allowed in areas in the election center where they can see confidential information. And then they are registered and given a badge and are then observing on behalf of a candidate.
So just to be clear, are they somebody who's employed by a campaign, or just, it sounds like anybody who can sign up through the campaign essentially?
Yep, they're signing up through a campaign. I don't know if they're paid by a campaign or not.
All right, thanks.
So I think there's a philosophical answer to that question as well. There's the mechanical question. They are observers who are appointed by and approved through a campaign. But ultimately, observation of elections has a long history in our country, and their purpose is to ensure that members of the public have an opportunity to see all the fine details of how the election is conducted and to raise concerns, and in specific in the canvassing process, are able to raise concerns about ballots and how they are identified or not as acceptable to be counted. And then the commissioners after that, during the canvass process, have the role of adjudicating the ballots relative to the observed challenges that are made. And so it's philosophically, it's a role that is to provide fidelity in an election process. So I would want to have that be part of it too.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that too, because I know there's the idea that, it should be public and the general public is observing, but also just noting that this has a specific definition.
Yep, absolutely. So, anyone else? Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment, I guess, question is along the same line as Commissioner Treadwell. If on page 18, you're taking out sending a complaint to the commission, what is the point of the commission then?
So that's great. Do you want to go, Ms. Alto? I can, or you?
I'm ready.
Go ahead, Ms. Alto. Yep.
So I brought up the code section because I think that the change here is meant to align with code, and code is 28.120.060, and it lays out the duties. There are 7 duties for the commission to undertake. Most of those are in an advisory capacity, which isn't unusual. Most boards and commissions, unless specifically adjudicatory, are advisory in nature. It does serve as the canvas board for municipal elections. Number 4 is what tracks specifically with the language. If requested by the assembly, investigate election contest and report to the assembly its findings. And then there are 6 and 7, which are kind of more hands-on. Review and adjudicate the preliminary rejection of question and absentee ballots. And 7 is review the results of the election tabulation provided by the municipal clerk's office. So I think there's a lot for the election commission to do. They are watching our elections, right? I hope that in the future we continue to hear, or more specifically hear, when we go through our Title 28 updates, recommendations they have for code, because that is when we go back and take that look back on the prior election and the code, and that would be that advisory capacity as stated in code as well.
And so I want to add more to that. So there's another section of code that references that the commission has an opportunity to communicate to the assembly whether they believe a misaction has happened in such a manner that it would be significant enough to overturn an election. That language is specifically tied to the contest. And the contest happens when 10 members of the public or a candidate fills out a form and says, I contest the elections on specific grounds. Now, much of the work we've been doing on the assembly with new members, kind of trying to define the difference between our political roles and our quasi-judicial roles. So effectively, and I'm a layman when I talk about this, not an attorney, the quasi-judicial function requires a different set of standards in order to participate. It can't have ex parte contact. You can't have done previous investigations on the question that's coming before you. And so the code specifically says that the assembly may refer contests to the commission. So if the commission has already engaged in fact-finding relating to specific allegations or issues, then they can't actually participate in an investigation in that quasi-judicial process because they've already been involved and are already tainted, if you will, by the question. And so the purpose of the commission keeping them as the code had drafted, as opposed to how it had evolved over just the last 2 elections, 24 months, is to ensure that if and when there is a contest, the question comes before us, we can in fact refer the investigation to the commission and they have not already been in the pool. That's really the net effect.
I guess a follow-up then, where would the candidate go if a candidate had an issue with the election?
The contest procedure is theirs. And so it's all lined out in the code.
So to the assembly or to the clerk?
It's the assembly. Ultimately, it's filed with the clerk, but the contest procedure is long in the code. It's a standard practice in elections across the country. And in fact, the clerk did investigations for us on what communities in Alaska allow their elections commission or their parallel board to have a role before the contest. There isn't one jurisdiction in the state of Alaska that does that. It's all in the jurisdictions across the state after the certification question has been presented to the assembly. And so if there is a contest, that has a very specific legal grounds and set of procedures, and that's the method that the code has granted for us to provide this through the process.
Mr. Chairman, can I be back in the queue?
Sure. First, Ms. Zalatel, then Mr. Treadwell.
Thanks. My question's for council or the clerk's office. So which one, because we use contest and then we have these challenge forms and other forms in this booklet. In the situation Mr. Myers is talking about, which form would I use if I wanted to file a contest? Which one of these forms equates to that?
You use none of these forms. There
Okay.
is not a form for a contest. It is, there, it's spelled out in the code what needs to be provided, a narrative of the issue and 10
Okay.
signatures, notarized signatures.
Is there a reason we don't provide a form? Is it because it seems like we provide a form for nearly every other instance? And I know, I probably could ask that question long ago, but it seems like to make this as user-friendly as possible, that might be something we want to contemplate in the future, is a really clear form that has the same, that basically does what these forms does, which is take the elements out of code and just puts them in a way that someone can use them. Thanks.
Mr. Treadwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the whoever it was who read the code, I believe it was council, said one of our jobs on the commission is canvass. I've attended canvasses of elections since the first one I was involved with in Alaska, I think in 1978. Was involved one before that, but I don't think I went to the canvas. And one of the things you can do at a canvas in most cases is bring forward, if you're a representative of a candidate or a citizen, you can bring forward a question. Hey, and I can tell you in the past that sometimes it's been you're counting these ballots with only one signature on the envelope and the law requires two, but you rejected these others and really didn't have it. And I would say that most of the questions that have come up to us during the canvas process are the kinds of things that sometimes it takes us half an hour, 45 minutes, 2 hours that I don't think you as the assembly want to do. When I attend your assembly meetings, they go a long, long time and they're pretty hard to get into depth. And almost all of our issues get resolved before the canvas is settled. And so if an observer can't even bring forward a concern until we've assigned it, and the concern can only come as part of trying to overturn an election, I think that's far less democratic than it needs to be. Okay, and I understand what you're saying about the quasi-judicial issue. I've served as a quasi-judicial official myself many times in state regulatory as a state regulator. But it doesn't mean that we can't talk about policy. What is the policy here with, for example, it was a very valid discussion on the last election to see, okay, if the state gives you registered voters and the city doesn't mail to them for what we finally figured out were good reasons, to air those issues, and it kind of saved it from being just one more reason to overturn an election that would come to you guys after certification. So I would at least urge you to get counsel to take a look at that distinction. I don't think you need to take away the power for the commission to hear concerns from observers as we do the canvas process. And that's how I would define canvas, is making sure it all adds up. And if somebody has noticed something that doesn't add up, I want to hear from it before I vote on a canvas.
Thank you. Mr. Cross. Oh, I'm sorry, but Mr. Cross hasn't talked yet, so Anna will be next.
Thank you. Yeah, when I look at that deletion of that paragraph on page 18, I'm reading what the intent was on that last sentence that's been removed. This information on the form ensures that, in addition to the observer's challenges on voting and counting matters that could change the outcome of the election, are available to the commission's review. So I'm just looking at this process that if I were an individual that had an issue, because I understand you say, well, it's in code the assembly, but my concern is the perception that the assembly is deciding what goes forward. But the assembly also hires the clerk and the ombudsman. And so I'm just curious on how we maintain those checks and balances so it doesn't look as if the assembly is overly powerful in this situation, and not this assembly, but future assemblies aren't preventing reasonable complaints or issues from progressing to the commission. And if there isn't maybe that's why that sentence was in there.
So I can answer that. The check on the election process, it's the assembly. And if the assembly's decision by whatever partisan or other organization or members of the commission, the check is actually the court. There are separate branches of government and it's the court. And so the contest procedure, it leads to the court. And that's how it's supposed to work. The charter, despite what people want to believe, wisely grants the elections process to the assembly branch, and the assembly has delegated it to the clerk. And so ultimately the check in the conversation is the superior court. First step is a contest, and that's the administrative procedure that's granted. You know, I would speak a little bit to the idea that the commission is well positioned in an interim between the actual day of election, canvass, and certification, position to kind of take facts and understand and make recommendations. That timeline is much too compressed for a meaningful investigation and review of facts. And so if in fact there are matters that are substantive enough, the contest should be filed. That's the bottom line. The form, as it was used the last time, it was really amazing. It was in the text of the form stated that they believe it was sufficient enough to overturn the outcome of an election. That's what they stated. And they effectively didn't say it because they were smart enough not to say it, that they wish that the Elections Commission would attempt to start overturning the election. But that's the actual work path that logical line of reason would take you. So the role of the commission through the canvass is to ensure that the votes cast were accurately cast. Now, after the certification, whether the assembly chooses to accept a contest or not, the commission can hear from their friends who write and text and email them, and then they can bring before the commission concerns that need to be updated. And in fact, that's what the whole Title 28 review process is for annually, is to take hearing the issues that people have brought up over the context of the previous election and ensuring that the best ideas are brought forward and integrated into the code. And so if one is looking for a check, it is not the Elections Commission. The check is the courts. Ms. Brawley.
Thanks. Yeah, I was also looking at, because I'm new to some of this stuff, so I was looking at the public session of Canvas, and it seems like there's kind of multiple things we're talking about, so I'm going to try to tease them out. The public session of Canvas does say, I'm looking at EMC 2885010, on or before the third Friday after an election, the Election Commission shall meet in public session to declare which ballots will be rejected and which would be counted. So as I understand it, that's the canvas. And so it's really looking at the individual ballot level. And I think Mr. Treadwell covered this. Are there issues? Are there opportunities? If it happens before the election to cure it, things like that. And so really looking so it's not about the total number of ballots. It's about which ones get counted or not. So kind of working from the ground up, if that's accurate. And then I think some of the other things we're talking about are, maybe broader process improvements or policy improvements. And that speaks more to, I think, what Mr. Constance said, the process we're going through now. Before we're in the middle of an election, if there's opportunities to improve there. And then I think that in a separate category is the question of, as we've said before, is there a contest, about the outcome of an election, which is the aggregate ballots and that result. So I guess I'm still not seeing where the Election Commission would have a role in a formal role based on the code as it's written necessarily in the contest, or at least not the first step, versus what it is in code to do these individual, dealing with the ballots individually. So we're making sure that we have the universe of ballots that need to be counted. And then of course the policy question. And I guess having been on an advisory commission is a different one. I know that we always had space for public comments. So it seems like in terms of having public opportunity, that is available year round, provided the Election Commission is meeting. Certainly any commission or board can schedule a public meeting or schedule a special meeting, to hear those issues. So So I guess I just want to be very clear, and hopefully I didn't misstate anything, but there's multiple pieces that we're talking about, all of which relate to elections, but are not all the same thing. And then, of course, these different entities have different roles.
I have Mr. Salt in the queue.
Thank you. So I'm trying to understand some of the concerns here. So it sounds like one of the concerns is, what if the election commission is biased or politically motivated? How do we check that process? And as we've seen whether committees or commissions, they tend to be appointed by those in power that may be persuaded one way or the other way. So where's that check? Maybe it's the assembly is that check that when we get a complaint that the election commission either validates or doesn't validate, or the clerk validates or doesn't validate. I guess who's checking that that's non-biased? That's kind of my question. I think that might be what Mr. Cross was possibly looking at on page 18 as well.
So I'll jump in there, Mr. Salt, and say nobody until you has asserted that the commission might be acting in a biased or political manner. And so that wasn't the purpose of the change. It was actually more because you have roughly 14 days to go from election to certification, or 20 days. I don't have the exact count in my head, but a very short time to turn around. And in that time, you're collecting ballots. In that time, you're validating signatures, and then you're tabulating ballots. And in the process, you are running a whole slate of challenged questions on ballots that were gathered. Is this legally cast? Then you're validating signatures, and all of those questions are subject to challenge by the observers. And then in the end, the judge of those questions for the purpose of the canvass is the commission. They just do that. The assembly doesn't reach into that process. So then the question is, in that 20-day or less period from the date the election closes to the certification process, where is the time, if a very confounding question comes up, for the commission to dig in and investigate? Where is the authority to do that? It doesn't exist until the question comes to the assembly. The assembly is the one who has the authority under the code and the charter to determine all of these facts, whether it's for one race or all of the races, are enough for us to consider postponing temporarily and having a contest process happen so that we can stop. And it would only be that one race, not broadly all of the races, unless something really extraordinary happened. And so the idea ultimately is that there isn't enough time to do all of these things by the commission when their primary role until the certification process is the canvass, unless the assembly opts to ask them by resolution to investigate. That's the method. And so that's really what the code has established in this process of this forms. At the last election, introduced a potentially confounding moment in our elections process, because there is no precedent, there is no authority, and there is no time for the Elections Commission to conduct an investigation without the assembly reaching over and saying, stop the presses. Ms. Alto, Mr. Cross after.
So, yeah, I think it's really important to look at this in the context of the code and not move it in abstracts. So the other portion beyond what the Election Commission does talks about the certification of an election. It's 28.85.040. So because all of these actions have to work within the context of the code, I think that that's really important. And if we are saying that there's something inherently flawed, then code revision is what we should be talking about, not necessarily handbook revision, because the whole handbook operates within the context of the code. So first, for the certification of election, the Election Commission municipal clerk shall report the results of the commission's ballot review canvass and the election results at an assembly meeting as soon as practicable. And I think that's what Mr. Constant was getting to. But if you look at subsection D there, I think that this is important. It says if the Election Commission or municipal clerk reports a failure to comply with the provisions of the law or illegal election processes or practices, and that such failure is sufficient to change the outcome of an election, the assembly may exclude the votes cast where such failure or illegal practices occurred from the total return, or may declare an entire election invalid and order a new election. So nothing here precludes the election commission from bringing forward a failure to comply, a report to us that there was a failure to comply with the provisions of the law or illegal election practices taken. It has to meet the standard where such a failure would be sufficient to change the outcome of an election, but that's inherent in the certification process. Nothing in this handbook prohibits that from happening. So I think that if you take the handbook in the context of code, there is that opportunity for the election commission to always bring something forward. Thank you.
Mr. Cross.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just, I'll have to think about this in some different process. I mean, it really helps if you have examples of situations that might occur, because there'd be so many different. But my biggest concern is just when it comes to the assembly, right? That we are establishing ourselves as the border between a contest moving forward or not to the elections commission. But like in the last election, we had 5 different assembly people come through. And so my concern is that we are as a body voting on people, maybe elections that concerned us or concerned a large majority of the assembly. And so I'm curious on making sure that, and maybe it is a code revision, but I really feel as if there needs to be a third party that is, more integral in that process, and that we aren't seen as unintentionally being an obstruction to those concerns being brought forward. Thank you.
So I just respond that up until 2021, the code was exactly how we're writing. We're taking it the process. And in fact, the previous clerk worked to establish this process because that office felt that they wanted to try to be more open to hearing. But what happened is the level of complaints ad absurdum bloomed to the point where we ended up having an investigation of corruption of our elections process because we had people tampering. And that's all part and parcel of this process. And so you're out of order, Ms. Elledge. You're out of order and you're creating a disturbance. Continue, and I'll ask you to be removed. Thank you. So the reality is that we are returning to the practice that's been in place since at least 2012. It's not new. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. Thinking more generally, it is an interesting question of accountability, right? Like because you want to be able to trust the people who are in charge, right? And in this case, who are dealing with an election. I guess 2 things that strike me. One is, this is a role of the assembly. Certainly, we are elected officials in the sense that there is a political process, right? That we participate in all of that. However, it does feel like we're also very directly accountable because we got elected, right? So we're directly accountable to the public. We are subject to recall for a number, or, potentially subject to recall for a number of different things. And we're not just basically hired staff. And so that seems to be the trade-off that, the way our code is written, the way it's been for a long time, we do delegate certain functions, but ultimately we decide because we have to vote. The other thing that strikes me is, having just gotten on this body and then watching, from the audience an election certification happen before I took office, there is a situation where somebody is running for re-election, and so they're voting on their own election, right? And that's just the reality of how this is. But also there's the situation where somebody, like my situation, where my predecessor did not run for re-election, and so so I was the one in the election, but wasn't participating in the vote itself. So I think there are stopgaps. And I think the reality is, if we did not use that process, and then it is the question, who would make those decisions? And then ultimately it would be left just to staff or to volunteers who have been appointed to this election commission. So I think it's tricky. We say we want a third party, but I think when you get into some of these core things about how government functions, there's a big risk to that as well. And especially who are they accountable to? So I agree, it's not an easy thing, but I do appreciate the context that this has been in the code for a long time. And I think just the reality is somebody has to vote to certify the election.
Well, and anybody can make as mad of allegations as they want. And so the reason the contest procedure is valuable, because it takes a statement of the cause that would actually be meaningfully and significantly impactful of the outcome of an election. And so they have to state the cause. They can't just make wild allegations and suggest, well, it could be this, but maybe it's not. And then they have to sign it, and they have to get 9 of their neighbors to sign it with them. And so they can't just come up, except the candidate can. The individual candidate has every right to file a contest, but the contest has to be based on a factual basis that whatever it is they're alleging has to be significant enough to overturn this outcome of a specific race. We just have to move away from this idea that soft allegations of something having gone wrong are enough to throw question onto the operation of an election that was done as flawlessly as can be done by human beings, right? Mistakes happen in every election, and that gets accounted for. But the reality is this process requires that the individual who is making the allegation either is the candidate or 10 people who are willing to sign their name to it. Because otherwise it's just squishy, like, oh, this thing could have been done wrong, so we should not trust our elections. Ms. Zelato.
Do you mind if I ask you a question, Mr. Cross? Okay, so it looks like that for the public session of Canvas, that's where all of the individual ballot questions come up, if there's any question about a ballot. Are you concerned about that or maybe more broad things with regard to an election? Because it looks like we have a very detailed process for purposes of any challenged ballot. It's several steps in code, and that does rest with the Election Commission. They make that final call, and then we accept the report out of the public session on Canvas. Are you concerned about that? Or are you concerned about situations that don't fall within that? I'm just trying to, and I know we didn't want to get into every possible example, but trying to narrow down where your concern lies.
No, I'll just have to chew more on that to see where those holes are. Again, I don't want us as an assembly, right? I is very cautious to me about that balance of powers. And I know that Chris says, hey, well, the court is the power, but it's expensive, it's long, it's drawn out. Just when I look at complaints moving forward, if anything, my concern is whether it's this assembly or one in the far distant future that, if there's a contentious issue or something, we don't, not seen as the one preventing legitimate concerns from moving forward. And it really just looks as if the assembly has too much power. When I see the contest is accepted, the assembly may request the election commission. I think that to me, it's the information on this form. Again, that last sentence was the reason that the commission is notified as well. And so, and maybe but I understand Chris's concern is that, and so part of it was that we saw this explosion of, complaints. I don't think that's necessarily a bunch of bad apples. I think what happened is we significantly changed the way we did elections. With mail-in ballot and mail-in voting and different things. And so as the way traditional elections are being held or changed, and people have these concerns. And so I don't think it's just because people are trying to create difficulties with the election. They just have concerns because things are changing and rules are changing, and the way they used to do it is altered. And they're like, wait a second. And I don't think that's a bad thing for people to interrogate the way that we're doing elections. I'm sorry it's an inconvenience and it may annoy us because you're dealing with a lot of issues, but I don't want to see us as being the gateway to reasonable concerns.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I think what that tells me is that what I gleaned from that is you are concerned more for global concerns, not individual ballot-based concerns.
Process concerns here locally in Anchorage.
Oh, I hear you. Okay, I wasn't done. I hear that. Process concerns. I really wish you would bring those up in the context of Title 28 revisions, because that's what dictates our process. And I think what's here and what has happened here is we've taken what was a practice, nobody moved it into code. And what we've done is we said, let's just go with what's in code. And so we just went through an extensive Title 28 rewrite where there was a lot of opportunity to do that. So I think, I think that the other piece to this that's so important to remember is our certifying the election, we take in the information and then we don't have a choice in the matter. It is one of the times we have to vote. We're put in that position. You have to, if you are a sitting member and you have to vote to certify for better or for worse your own election results. If you're subject to a recall or reelection. And I think that that's also a significant check. The other piece I think that's really important to keep at the forefront of all of this is it can't just be that change is hard. Every complaint that's supposed to rise to this level has to be sufficient to change the result of an election. The rest of the complaints should really be brought to us during that Title 28 process. And I think that's maybe at some of those process pieces, because then that's when we get the opportunity to refine the process through the Title 28 code rewrite. And yeah, it happens well after the election and people's memories or their engagement are short, but that's where to engage. And that's why we have the committee to really dig in and continue the work. So I appreciate the conversation because I was really trying to drill down on the different types of complaints and process versus the type that could result in the overturning of an election versus an individual ballot challenge. Thank you.
I would argue that.
Mr. Chairman, may I too?
Sure, I'll have you in the queue next, Mr. Treadwell. The implementation of the vote by mail, vote from home isn't new. 2015 and or 2017, 2016. 2018. Okay, 2018. So we've had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 citywide elections run vote by mail, and a whole bunch more that are special elections in sub-districts. So we're up to, many. But I think for me, what this all comes back to is the code does not grant plenary power to investigate to the commission. And that power has to be granted to it. Hearing of concerns at the end of their meeting when they have public comment, that's fine. Having a whole meeting about we want to hear your elections concerns after the certification process, especially if no one filed a contest, right? Then it's open season that the commission can take on those questions and work on those issues as it sees fit. But in the process of the actual conduct of the election from the date the election closes to the date of certification, it's a very orderly and time-bound process with all of these steps that have to be achieved. And the only body that has an authority to interrupt that process other than a court is the assembly. And we can do that if a contest is brought to us, or if we decide we can order a recount. The clerk can order a recount on specific questions. The clerk can send forward concerns. If there are concerns in the process that the commission has heard just from the media and in the community, from members of the various campaigns, they can communicate to us. But ultimately, the trigger has to be a formal process, and it simply can't be in the middle of all of those steps that have to happen in the time that we go from election day to the certification. Because we are the ones with the plenary power, nobody else. Mr. Treadwell.
Now, Mr. Chairman, if you had, on one of the complaints at the last canvassing, I think I explained that to the complainer. But at the same time, I would say that I was glad to hear the issue come forward. And one of the reasons why it came forward was right there, fresh in our conception of this was, and it was an IT issue and totally separate from the issue of what was the IT policy. I don't think we would have known of the question in procedures of whether or not these USB plugins are checked. We did not tell the assembly don't certify the election. I don't consider it a waste of the hour of my time. I know that there were other issues related to that complaint, but we dealt with the complaint, and I would say probably built trust in the election, and that's one of the main things. I've been on all sides. I've been on lieutenant governor counting where people like Joe Miller were suing me, trying to prevent Lisa Murkowski from serving in something that she won, and I've been on the losing side of other elections. And because you have a public process where you can ask a question, hey, what happened to these people in this precinct who didn't get their ballots? Or something else like that. That's a positive thing for democracy, not a negative thing. And I guarantee you, we've had others who did want to waste our. I'm not going to say waste our time, but suggest that a mail-in ballot was a violation of human rights. And I think we dealt with that expeditiously. Okay. But where things come up in the process, ground ruling us out not to air them and be able to ask the clerk right now, hey, can you explain what happened on this? Is kind of silly. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
It's not.
Mehid,
I'm
can
not
I-
worried
can I
about the waste
offer
of time as
something?
much as I am about trust. So
Mehid?
I'll leave it there. Yeah, go
Mehid,
ahead.
two things.
Yeah.
One, I'm sorry that we had the technical issue with the phones, because the place that this conversation started was that I want everyone to recognize that the commission did exactly what it's tasked to do and did it well in the last election. So that's the predicate of this conversation. And the concerns that were raised were separate because of the broader implications. But first, we start with thank you. You did your job and it was really well done. And the second part is that the clerk will provide for the commission the complaints that they received and responded to. So before the certification process happens, you will in fact have all of that information. It will be provided to you. And that's not going to change. You will have the opportunity to have conversations about the issues that are raised in the complaints process. You just aren't, if this passes, not going to have the ability to open a plenary investigation until the assembly has heard the question. You'll be able to report to us, hey, we heard these things through the complaint process. We don't think the clerk reported in a manner that is accurate, and we think more needs to be done about this. That is well within your authority, even without this. It's just not beginning a new investigative process in the middle of that review of ballots as we go on towards the certification. So you will not be kept in the blind.
Mr. Chairman, our practice has not been to open up an investigation per se, but sometimes we take 10 or 15 minutes to hear something out. And I guess I would make one other point, which is very different than the law. You and I have been candidates for office, okay? We look at our numbers and how well we do, because if we win or lose, we'd like to know that the numbers are accurate so we can tell people this is how the real poll worked, okay? Some of the questions that come up may have to do with counting on something that doesn't affect the turn of the election. It may have something to do with the process, not a single individual ballot. And so I think we're doing our job by hearing that out and asking questions right then and there. If I think you could give our council, your council, guidance to say, hey, don't go there because you might be asked to you might be asked to do something that can overturn an election, or review and overturn the election. But just to understand that that it's not just the results of the election that care. The results of the election include how well did each candidate do. And changing the results of the election may not change who got elected. It may change what the number of votes were. So anyway, and that often happens in a recount. So at any rate, I understand what you're trying to do, and I understand that we have reserved we've not tried to exceed our power. I just believe that if part of the goal of an election commission is to build trust, having an ability for the public to air something and for us to ask questions right then and there, hey, what's up with this? I think this clerk and the last clerk will tell you they've been very responsive. And if we felt we didn't like the answer, we've said, well, can you get us a better answer? And it's not necessarily an investigation. It's trying to figure out what's behind it so that we can make recommendations to you. So at any rate, thank you for the compliment. And I'm not speaking on behalf of the whole commission, but I guess I'll just say, if a member of the public goes up and says, hey, why did you count this way when you counted something else a different way? We might want to turn around and ask the question. That's all.
Right, and that is, the ballot questions are squarely within the authority of the commission and the canvas. Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, I just, this is just a clarification question for Mr. Treadwell. So, because you had mentioned something about looking at the results and candidates looking at the results. As I understand it, that's not a role of the election commission. So can you maybe just clarify part of what you had just said? Because I assume that's not in the
Sure.
scope of the commission that you're speaking about, which candidate performed in what way.
No, but let me clarify. Let's suppose that an issue comes up that this is a common one in elections. It hasn't happened while we've been on the commission that I'm aware of, but you've got mail-in ballots and the post office didn't postmark it, so you don't know if they were postmarked in time. Okay, and whatever the policy is, because those policies tend to change, the jurisdictions. A candidate might say, well, I'd like to see these things open, or I'd like you to rule in this way. And that person may well be the losing candidate. A person may well be somebody who hasn't got a chance. But I guess they have a right to get an accurate count, and the public has a right to get an accurate count of how people voted if we determine that the postmark issue was done properly, however it comes down. And I guess all I'm saying is, if you're saying hold back until you know what's going to affect an election, I think I think that's too high a standard. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that we're. I mean, it's eliminating kind of partisan issue with the candidate.
Thanks. So, and I would, you want to follow up?
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. I figured that wasn't what you had meant, but yeah, I guess where I'm still looking at this is, the canvas of ballots, as I understand it, is there may be themes across, if multiple ballots are looking at the same thing, that suggests maybe there's, potential change to be made in the future as far as policy. But it's still really, as I understand it, establishing the universe of ballots that are counted or not counted, and then the reasons for that. And so it's, so I appreciate that, wanting to know the final results, but ultimately I think the first question is, was each individual ballot treated differently?
That's your first chance. And, I'll tell you, in the Hickel-Hammond race in 1978, it was long after a recount where we were supposed to get a good answer that we were able to add up the number of ballots that had been printed and the number of ballots that had been returned. And we found over close to 300 ballots sitting in a locker in an election office in Wasilla. And I guess the point is that if an observer comes to us and says, hey, some number doesn't add up, it may not refer to an individual ballot, but it may refer to the integrity of the election. And it may not be enough to, and we may get an answer right then and there from the clerk that says, oh no, that's because we had to destroy those. We didn't tell you about that because it wasn't a big issue or whatever. And the whole thing's resolved. But if you ground rule saying you can't talk about something that is a procedure, you're taking away from the public trust. I'm not saying you may get one or two more complaints, but at least let the public raise their concerns. That's what we're there for. And we sorted it out for you. We delivered you a set of numbers that we trusted, and ultimately you guys trusted and accepted. I'm speaking about the assembly. Anyway.
So I would just tune in right to the exact specific example you used relating to the question of postmarks on ballots. No postmarks or postmarked but received, that it was postmarked after the close of the election, or it was unreadable. You couldn't tell what date it was postmarked, even though it was postmarked. Those are all questions that are in the manual. It's code B, W, W1, or W2. And those are issues that the commission does, in fact, sort through before the certification at the public session of Canvas. And so ballot by ballot, I've been in the room when it happens, 400 or 600 ballots are gone through one at a time, and every member agrees or not, then there's a vote on this ballot or that ballot. But the postmark ones is the example that you used, are the easy ones, because as hard as it is and as much as it sucks, the U.S. Postal Service does have kind of a history of missing some stamps on those ballots. And I personally always tell folks the drop boxes are just as efficient as the Postal Service. use the Dropbox because there are 16 of them across town and they're ready to go and free. Mr. Lehman.
I might say more efficient. I always use the Dropboxes
Yeah.
for that reason.
Yep. And so then you never have to worry about the code, the postmark, you know,
On that issue.
on that issue.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Lehman. So we are over time. We have 2 minutes left. The members will consider this item before us on Tuesday. Welcome comments. If you want to continue by email, let us know. I understand this feels like it's a removal. It's a realignment back to what the code says. It's proposed. The assembly will have this decision before us on Tuesday. You can, yes, Mr. Lehman.
When I agreed to join the commission, I said, my goal is honest and fair elections. And I think the commission has been proceeding that way. Everything I've seen in the action of the commission is that, and quite frankly, the same thing is true of the election officials and the clerk. And so I would commend them as well. And this is from my memory, so I may be getting it just a little bit wrong, but when concerns were raised to us, we looked at those and we thought there may be some valid concerns of some issues, but at least in my mind, and I think the mind of the other commissioners, they weren't enough to overturn and change the outcome of the election. Now, is there good reason to step in and perhaps change procedures? Because one of the things that's really important, in my opinion, is just the appearance of fairness. We want voters to know that the process followed is fair, it's honest, we want good participation. And so even the appearance has to be good. In that case, you know, if I'm mixing up the issues, I'm sorry, but I remember the one about a worker came in with a flash drive and inserted it because they had to make some changes. And I told the clerk, I said, this one is easy to handle. Explain it ahead of time to the observers what you are doing. And then they said, well, we're going to be scanning these drives, make sure there's no virus on them. And we thought, well, it's a good thing. You know, there are people who know far more about this than I do doing that. So those are good changes. Now, we look at it, we don't think right there it changed the outcome of the election. Besides, we have in that back room all the paper ballots. We get access to that. We can always count them.
Run them again.
Now, I mean, that would be burdensome, but if you want to just verify the outcome of an election, we had the backup and it was right there. So, well, any rate, I guess my concern is, are we doing anything here that appears to be making it more challenging for election observers to do their job? I hope not.
I think the one thing we're doing here that really puts a burden on them is we're saying, you're telling the truth when you bring forward a complaint. That's the one thing we're adding to this list is you are telling the truth. Because before there was nothing on there to sign, hey, I'm telling the truth.
Yeah, and unsworn falsification is already somewhere in municipal code or state code.
Yep.
It's presumably a misdemeanor. Well, it depends probably on the application. I don't know, but anyway, it's crime.
And so we're just making it really, really, really clear for folks that is their burden as an observer. Tell
Okay.
the truth.
Okay. Well, while it may be just a little bit of field on this one, but consistent with the comment I made it may have been the last commission meeting. I think the focus after the election was on the wrong thing, rather than on fixing procedures and making sure that they're tighter, you know, with the IT procedures. The focus was on who got what information when, and I thought, you know, that to me, you know, if we want to make sure an election is fair, we go and make the changes that we need to make to guarantee that they are going to be fair. So anyway, that's my opinion, but I don't know that really has much impact on this observer handbook other than, if you want advice from a commission member.
Right. And
But,
really,
yeah.
there's this kind of area in between. The investigative report, it did not have anyone come forward to testify that the individuals who were interviewed did what they did on purpose. But there were certainly testimonies behind the scenes, people who wouldn't come in here because of fear of retribution, that was all real. And so for me, the process that we looked into was the right thing because we needed to know the facts. And so we are still having conversations about the procedures that the complaint came to us with this so-called policy. But, one thing to note is that the administration still has not forwarded that policy to circulate and have commentary among all of the department heads, because they'll hear back, of course, from all the department heads, the practicality of that policy, which is, it's not practical. You can't have an IT staff going into every office. You can't have an IT staff going to the police department and the prosecutor's office and to the municipal attorney's office. And it just doesn't work that way. So when they put forward that policy on that specific issue, we'll be happy to be part of that conversation. But we are definitely looking at election security as a body, and specifically we have staff that's their function. And so to the point that you're making, that what about the main issue, it will be addressed, and I'm sure that will be before you. Thank you. And with that, I think we're out of time. We've exceeded our time allowed. Thank you, everybody.